From red carpets and handshakes in Anchorage to crushing tariffs that shook Switzerland, and a renewed obsession with Greenland's rare earths. Donald Trump's second term is rewriting the rules of global power. What looks like political theater on the surface is, in reality, a high-stakes contest over war, trade, and the world's most critical resources. And the question hanging over Washington, Ottawa, Brussels, and beyond is simple: who adapts fastest and who pays the price? A red carpet welcome in America for a man facing accusations of war crimes. President Donald Trump applauded his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, as the two world powers greeted each other like old friends. Many expected the summit to produce at least a ceasefire agreement or an outline for peace. President Trump himself hinted that progress might be possible. Yet when the talks ended, there was little to show. The backdrop to the meeting was weeks of trade disputes, with Trump's tariff standoffs against Canada, the European Union, and more than 60 countries dominating global headlines. Now, attention shifted briefly to Anchorage, where the Trump-Putin summit was framed as a historic. Putin opened his short press conference by invoking Russian-American history, particularly the alliance during World War II. For Moscow, this was about highlighting old bonds and presenting Russia as an indispensable partner. For Trump, the stage offered an opportunity, the chance to portray himself as the leader who could deliver peace in Ukraine. Yet beneath the symbolism, the summit revealed a sharp divide between image and reality. Observers were quick to draw conclusions. Trump didn't exactly lose, one analyst said, but Putin clearly walked away the winner. Trump had hoped for a ceasefire. Instead, he left with nothing concrete. Putin, meanwhile, enjoyed the optics, a red carpet, a flyover, warm handshakes, and glowing coverage on Russian state television. In practical terms, the summit delivered no ceasefire, no new sanctions, and no concrete agreements. Putin returned to Moscow with precisely what he wanted: visibility on the global stage, and the image of standing shoulder to shoulder with an American president. Without paying any new price for the war, Trump departed Anchorage with little more than vague promises of future meetings, and a suggestion that the conflict might one day be frozen in place, with territorial concessions on the table. Analysts noted that such an arrangement would leave Putin free to prolong the war while avoiding real consequences. Meanwhile, U.S. media focused on Trump's tired appearance and the lack of clarity in his message. Rather than laying down firm red lines, he emphasized what he called a fantastic relationship with Putin. Critics argue this gave Moscow the clear upper hand. Europe's response was swift and united, determined not to let Anchorage become a turning point for Russia. European leaders rallied behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This time, Zelensky arrived in Washington not as an isolated guest, but as the centerpiece of a transatlantic coalition. By his side were NATO's Secretary General, the President of the European Commission, and the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Finland. Their agenda was unmistakable: firm security guarantees for Ukraine, modeled on NATO's Article 5. A clear rejection of any settlement that forces Kyiv to surrender territory. The president of the European Commission stressed that borders cannot be redrawn through aggression, and that Ukraine must retain the ability to defend itself. By arriving together, these leaders amplified Zelensky's voice and turned him into a symbol of unity. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney also added his support, praising what he described as new openness from Washington. He underlined that robust and credible security guarantees are essential to any just and lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. His tone was measured, avoiding direct clashes with Trump. Yet his message echoed Canada's consistent position: peace cannot rest on fragile compromises. While Ukraine and its European allies pressed for stronger commitments, Carney framed his remarks as a reminder only credible guarantees can ensure stability. Anything less risks leaving the conflict unresolved. The Alaska summit once again revealed how political theater can overshadow the harsh realities of war. Vladimir Putin walked away with strong optics, powerful images, but no new sanctions. Donald Trump, meanwhile, left without the breakthrough. He was aiming for Europe closed ranks firmly behind President Zelensky. While Canada underscored the importance of reliable security guarantees rather than quick, risky bargains, the lesson here is striking. Trump's tariff tensions with Canada, the European Union, and more than 60 countries have already shown how short-term fixes in trade can lead to long-lasting costs. Anchorage now presents a similar challenge, this time in the realm of security. The question moving forward is clear. Can Trump rise above short-term tactics and secure lasting peace without sacrificing Ukraine's sovereignty or eroding the trust of America's closest allies? At the same time, the president is intensifying his global tariff war. In early August, Switzerland suddenly found itself targeted with a staggering 39% tariff, one of the highest rates the United States has imposed so far. Trump also warned the European Union that it could face a 35% levy unless it committed a massive $600 billion in U.S. investments. This escalation came just days after Washington and Brussels announced a framework agreement that capped EU duties at 15%. The message from the White House was unmistakable. Even a deal once struck could still be followed by new demands. The Swiss president, notably, flew to the United States without a formal White House invitation, an extraordinary move that underscored the pressure Bern was under to negotiate. And Trump didn't stop there. He floated additional tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, signaling that no sector, no matter how critical, is off the table. Facing a crushing 39% U.S. tariff, Switzerland's president flew to Washington without a formal White House invitation, an extraordinary step that showed the urgency of the moment. Bern offered a new proposal: possible increases in U.S. LNG purchases, higher imports of American pharmaceuticals, and even adjustments to an order for Lockheed Martin fighter jets. But there was one line Switzerland refused to cross: its protected agricultural market. Without that concession, the talks stalled. The Swiss delegation returned home empty-handed, and the 39% tariff remained in force. For Switzerland, a nation whose exports to the U.S. include high-value goods like luxury watches, chocolate, and skincare products, the economic impact is real. The message was unmistakable. Under Trump's tariff strategy, only concrete, visible concessions bring relief. This approach has become a hallmark of Trump's trade playbook, raising tariffs first, then pushing for bigger concessions. We've seen it with the European Union, pressured to deliver $600 billion in U.S. investments. And with Japan and South Korea in earlier negotiations, the EU, in contrast to Switzerland, secured a framework deal that capped tariffs at 15%. But even that agreement carried strings attached. Almost immediately, Trump linked it to the massive $600 billion investment demand. Two patterns emerged. The EU bought time with concessions, but remained under constant threat of escalation. Switzerland, offering less, ended up stuck with one of the steepest tariff rates on the books. Together, these cases set the boundaries for other countries still in negotiations, including Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing strategic patience. Ottawa is diversifying exports toward the EU and UK markets that have already seen double-digit growth this year, while keeping communication lines with Washington open. And Canada has leverage. From critical minerals and energy supplies to its role in North American auto supply chains. Ottawa controls assets the U.S. cannot easily replace. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has warned that these tariffs ultimately hurt American consumers and jobs, reinforcing the idea that Canada negotiates from a position of strength, not submission. Switzerland's setback did not end with watches and chocolate. The U.S. administration extended the 39% tariff to imported gold bars, a stunning move. Against the world's largest refining hub, this wasn't just about Switzerland. It was a message to global markets. No commodity is untouchable. Gold shipments between the US and Europe halted almost instantly. Prices in America surged above European levels, creating a sudden arbitrage gap. Until early August, traders believed bullion would remain exempt. But that illusion ended when U.S. Customs confirmed under Tariff Code 710,813,550 that standard bars, from central bank stockpiles to commercial refineries, were now subject to the full 39% duty. Imports had spiked earlier in 2025, 43 metric tons in January alone as buyers rushed to build stockpiles ahead of potential policy changes. But with tariffs now in place, those reserves are all that remain to cover the gap for global trade. This wasn't just a price adjustment, it was a rupture in the supply chain. And for Canada, the lesson is direct. Gold may not be a critical Canadian export to the US, but this same logic could easily extend to strategic minerals, energy, or high-end manufacturing. The gold shock proved how quickly decades-old trade flows can be disrupted, sometimes by a single enforcement letter. The Swiss case shows what happens when a country arrives without a concession Washington values you. Leave with the same high tariff you came in with. The EU case shows that even a signed deal can be tied to fresh demands. For Canada, the path forward is to combine resolve with leverage to be ready to walk away from a bad deal, while offering proposals that align with US interests without sacrificing core advantages. In this contest, Canada is not a junior partner. It is a critical economic ally, holding bargaining chips Trump cannot ignore. The outcome will depend on how effectively Ottawa plays them in the weeks ahead. Trump's tariff policy remains fluid and unpredictable, a tool of constant pressure. For Canada, for Europe, and for the world, the real question isn't just about tariffs. It's about whether these high-stakes negotiations reshape global trade or fracture it beyond repair. Prime Minister Mark Carney's strategy carries even greater weight in today's climate. While Ontario Premier Doug Ford pushes back publicly with sharp numbers and blunt talk, Carney is quietly keeping the channels of negotiation open, even as Canada faces a steep 35% tariff rate. His government is deepening cooperation with Mexico, strengthening ties with the European Union, and protecting Canadian industries from sudden US policy shocks. Canada's leverage lies in what America cannot easily replace: strategic minerals, reliable energy, and integrated auto supply chains. The recent gold tariff episode only reinforced Ottawa's push to diversify export markets and prepare contingency plans across multiple sectors, from steel and aluminum to copper, and now gold. Trump's playbook is clear: target sectors where Washington can apply maximum short-term pressure. The element of surprise keeps trade partners off balance, pushing them to concede before they can coordinate a unified response. But with Canada, that strategy has met resistance. Carney and Ford are aligned in rejecting bad deals, making it clear Canada will not absorb US pressure without a counterplan. For Ottawa, the gold tariff wasn't just a Swiss problem, it was a warning shot. The contest now is not about who can raise tariffs higher. It's about who can adapt faster to the shocks that are still to come. Donald Trump's second term has also reignited an obsession dating back to 2019, Greenland. This time, it isn't just a headline-grabbing remark about buying the island. It is a sustained strategy aimed at securing control over one of the world's richest untapped sources of critical minerals. Trump frames Greenland as both a national security necessity and an economic opportunity, placing it at the very center of his global resource agenda. Greenland's vast deposits of rare earths, molybdenum, and other critical materials are worth billions. They are the backbone of technologies ranging from fighter jets and clean energy turbines to next-generation batteries and aerospace systems. In June 2025, Greenland granted a 30-year permit for an EU-backed project to mine molybdenum, vital for steel, defense, and clean energy. But the backdrop is China's dominance. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, China accounted for 40% of global molybdenum production in 2024 and controls up to 97% off when Beijing restricted metal exports earlier this year. In retaliation for tariffs, U.S. automakers like Ford were forced to halt production at plants in Chicago and Louisville within weeks. For Trump, Greenland represents one of the few viable ways to break China's stranglehold on critical minerals. Trump's tactics combine public bravado with quiet deal-making. Australian firm Energy Transition Minerals has already invested $150 million in mapping the Tambree's rare earth deposit, considered one of the largest in the world. Yet the obstacles are enormous: no ports, no roads, Arctic weather that can ground flights for days, and ore types never before processed at commercial scale. Even so, U.S. investors remain eager, driven by the promise of securing the West's supply chains. Greenland's leaders have been firm: "You cannot buy us. We are not for sale." Their stance mirrors Canada's own experience. Trump once joked about making Canada America's 51st state, a remark that grabbed headlines, but also reflected his style of using pressure to unsettle trade partners. In 2025, the U.S. raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, targeting sectors from lumber to machinery. Prime Minister Carney resisted rushing into concessions, instead coordinating with provincial leaders like Ford to maintain a united stance. The goal was simple: resist bad deals while protecting Canadian sovereignty and industries. This strategy aligns Canada with other global players navigating similar U.S. pressure. The EU's partnership with Greenland secures critical minerals outside China's control. Canadian mining interests, like the Greenland Resources molybdenum project, are part of this same supply chain shift. By coordinating investments and policies, Canada, the EU, and Greenland are building a framework that reduces dependence on both U.S. and Chinese market. For Ottawa, this approach protects sovereignty and stability. For Greenland, it enables development without tying itself to a single power. For Brussels, it hedges against geopolitical risk. In Trump's eyes, Greenland is not optional, it is essential. Its minerals could free the West from China's grip, and its geography, just 1,200 miles from the U.S. East Coast, makes it a strategic outpost between Russia, China, and North. But securing that prize will not be simple. Canada is leveraging alliances and its own resource base. The EU is embedding Greenland into its strategic materials plan. Greenland's leaders are weighing offers against their autonomy and environmental standards. What's unfolding is more than a dispute over tariffs. It is a race for Arctic resources, a contest that will define supply chains, alliances, and power balances for decades to come. Deals are being signed, alliances are forming, and decisions in Ottawa, Brussels, Nuuk, and Washington will shape not only the future of the Arctic, but the global balance of power and critical minerals for a generation.